articles and informative blogs on various subjects of law, well-documented and structured legal templates, drafts of petitions, agreements, contract deeds, etc., for easy reference or use as a clause checklist, public platform for publishing your work with us, free legal aid, and an open space for healthy debates and discussion. So we provide these services, which include legal consultancy. We write blogs and articles. We arrange legal events and seminars like we are doing today. We provide free legal templates. We provide a tab which is known as Legal Essentials, in which basically it is a checklist for all the documents and a checklist for all the basic legal stuff which you need. We provide legal services, and we would be starting with the internship opportunities as well. So legal consultancy, we try to provide advice on number of important matters depending upon the needs of the litigant. We assist the litigant in handling the dispute, analyzing and identifying the legal issues, and drafting the legal documents. Through these blogs, we endeavor to provide information regarding the latest legal developments from around the globe. This would help the readers in shaping their opinions about a particular legal event or an amendment made to law. Blogs would strive to provide factual information without any personal bias and interest to initiate a healthy legal discussion among the masses. Similarly, through our legal services, we intend to give back to the community with some pro bono. Please feel free to contact us for any legal advice or join a community to help more and more people across the country. Similarly, through our legal essentials, we try to provide you with all the easy to comprehend information in a step-by-step manner by filtering out all the unnecessary details. Find all you need to know about the important filings. Through our legal draft, we actually do the research for you. Whether you are a practicing lawyer or a law student, you will find a well-researched and carefully drafted, ready-to-use templates of petitions, agreements, contracts, etc. for your handy views, and what's more, it is free of cost. And it can also be used as a checklist for your purpose and can be edited as per your client's need. We are providing internship opportunities to young budding writers, legal content writers to publish their work and provide essential feedback and helping in perfecting your piece. So basically, our recent success stories, we filed information against WhatsApp for antitrust activities, which was the case of SIA. We were the part of the legal research team in the Zoom, in the case where WhatsApp was, given. We got common orders against WhatsApp in the Competition Commission of India. The matter which was, taken through cognizance. In our matter as well, the CCI took our information on board and said that this matter is also would be clubbed along with the suo motu cognizance. We were also the research team behind the PIL, Dr. Seema Singh and others versus Union of India, in which the Honorable Delhi High Court had issued notice to the Union of India regarding WhatsApp new privacy policy. And following our spirit of giving something back to the society, we started a legal COVID relief fund. During the second wave of COVID, we tried to fulfill our social obligation and started with the legal COVID relief, through which we provided free legal assistance to the common folk who were harassed during these challenging times. So if anyone who requires legal advice, especially in Delhi, or legal assistance, especially in Delhi, who have been duped of his money, or who suffered because of the COVID and requires any legal assistance, then please feel free to contact us. Now, without wasting more time, we are coming to the webinar. So now, following the spirit of giving something back to the society, we have come up with this interesting talk on the topic UAPA, bona fide intention but mala-fide implementation. While the need for UAPA is advocated on the grounds of national security, it is argued sometimes that the act obstructs the right to dissent. Recently, the Delhi High Court granted bail to Natasha Nawal, Devangana Kalita, and Asif Iqbal Tanha in the Delhi riots cases, in which 3 activists were charged under the stringent UAPA Act. What the Delhi High Court observed that the right to protest is a fundamental right that can't be termed as a terrorist act. The Delhi Court passed strict observations against the UAPA law. Even though the Supreme Court has passed orders saying that the order of the Delhi High Court cannot be treated as a precedent, but the Pandora box regarding the implementation of UAPA law and its use by the state is out in the open. So we have decided that to understand this law, we would arrange this webinar. The speakers for the webinar are Mr. Nishikant Babu, Nishikant Bibu, sorry, who is an assistant professor at School of Law, Galgotias University. Mr. Bibu has a teaching experience of more than 6 years, teaching various legal subjects. He has more than 9 publications to his name in different facets of law. Mr. Bibu has been a judge in various moot court competitions and have presented around 10 papers on various facets of law. It's an honor to have you, sir. Our second speaker for the event is Mr. Mrityunjay Kumar, who is an assistant professor at Faculty of Law, Delhi University. Mr. Mrityunjay has a teaching experience of more than 6 years. He has more than 9 publications to his name and in different facets of law. And currently, his paper cross exam the recently his paper Right to Privacy in Post-Human World has been selected by the prestigious Cross-Examination Debate Society United States as one of the best 51 papers of this decade. So, and the event would be moderated by our dear friend, Mrs. Swati Khanna, who is an advocate at Delhi High Court and who is a known social right activist. With these words, I hand over the podium to Swati to take over the
Hi. Am I audible and am I visible?
Yeah, you are audible and visible.
Okay, thank you. I welcome the speakers, Professor Mrityunjay and Professor
Thank
Bibu.
you. Thank you, Swati.
Thank you for joining in, sir.
Thank you.
It feels really good to have a lecture from our professors because now we have graduated in the COVID last year and then we really wanted some lectures, I think. So I will be starting, but before that, I will just like to say that this topic, UAPA, has been a very hot topic for, I think, 2 or 3 years especially. Although this UAPA is a very old act, but the topic is very hot because many arrests, many bails, everything is happening in the garb of UAPA. So before that, I just want to say that this debate is totally on legal perspectives. We would like our intention for this debate or discussion will be a better term to use. This discussion is for common people to understand the interpretation of the law. How a law is interpreted. A law is not a novel you read in one go. Any act is not a law novel wherein we read in one go. It's an act wherein we have to interpret every word, and that is what is our intention today because our professors are the best people to tell us how to interpret law. Yes, implementation is very different from the law in theory, but that will be also taken care of today, taking into the consideration the ongoing situation. So my first question is to first of all thank you sir again for coming. Thank you sir Mrityunjay sir and Nishikant sir for coming. I would like to start my questions and my questions will be very general and to the both of you. Whoever feels that they want to answer they can, and whoever feels they want to add something or maybe give an alternative opinion on the same thing, please feel free to do that. This talk will be going on for 40 to 50 minutes, and we will also be considering some questions. If the audience wants to give, they can write in the chat box. Mr. Gurkaran will be looking at your questions, and then if time permits, we will also take the questions of the audience so that our professors can uh, give the answers to those questions. And this is a very lucky moment because people who are not in law school, they get the opportunity to listen to professors who teach us in such renowned colleges. Thank you, sir. So my first question is UAPA, which was before the amendment, the recent amendment in 2019, and UAP currently. How do you see them differently? And do you feel that that was what was the definition? What was the definition in paper, and how it was applied before and today? And I just want a brief introduction to UAPA from Mrityunjay sir. You can start if you.
Yes. Swati, as we are aware that in India there is a history of a special laws, starting with TADA, POTA, and then we have UAPA. And we have a colonial legacy of such laws. For example, you can see in British colony Rowlatt Act or Law of Sedition. These are all the laws related to colonial legacies, and it was meant to suppress the voices of Indian people, and that's why that kind of culture was there, which is still continuing in post-colonial India, which is very unfortunate. What is the justification to keep law like law of sedition or special laws like UAPA in India? Especially when we claim that India is a country which has been governed on the basis of rule of law and the principles of human rights. And in such a country, we have a law, a special law, in the name of sovereignty and integrity of the nation. The voices of people is muzzled, suppressed, and in fact terrorized. So that is the real problem before us. So before the amendment of 2019, this law was still draconian in nature. Still, it was misused by various government. Not only this law, but also TADA, POTA, etc. These laws have been misused by various government in our country. And because the very nature of law is of such kind that it is bound to be misused, because we have a special laws. And if I refer one of the great theorist, constitutional theorist Carl Schmitt, who said once that a real application of law begins with a state of exception. And what does it mean, a state of exception? The general application of law has no interest of any person. It starts, and real stimulation starts with its exception. What does it mean? So you keep suspend law, rule of law. You keep suspend rule of law in such a way that you create a special measures, and the special measures become the general rule. And by that way, you are going to suspend the very idea of human rights and rule of law in this country. And this is what is happening in current scenario.
Thank you, sir. Nishikant sir, please. आपका, I think, sir, your mic is off. आपका mic off. It is still off. Gurkaran, can you unmute?
Hello, is it audible to you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Actually, what sir was telling, sir has given a very good background. What was the purpose of having such kind of laws, and how this UAPA is still draconian after 2019 amendment? So actually, what we can figure out, there are two sets of mind working in India. One set of mind, they actually think that we must have some kind of toughest law which can deal with terrorism. One set of mind thinks that if such law comes, it can be misused against the students, against the human rights activists and all that. So we have parallelly two sets of mind working with each other. So this law is something which can be tried to balance with these two thoughts. One which says we must need some law, and one thing that these laws can be misused. So the origination of this law deals its historical importance from the way when India was facing the attack from China. So we were in the external aggression, and in 1962, when the Indian government was busy with dealing with China, the historical fact says that in India, the Tamil Nadu state, where CM Annadurai was in practice of having a separate Tamil state. So in that context, the government was in a position of haphazard, that whether to deal with the external aggression or to deal with the internal disturbance, what was created during the time of CM Annadurai. So in that, and a lot of similar things were happening at that time, like in the Communist Party, the Marxists has separated from the Communist Party, and at that time also 1964, then when the Lal Bahadur Shastri died. So a lot of things were going on at that time, and in that point of time, India thought, why not we must have a law which can deal with. We will keep fighting with the external countries, but when the internal disturbances come, like disturbance in my own country, then we must have some law which can curtail, at least I can refer this term, curtail such kind of extra freedom given to the citizens. And in that context, I think UAPA law were brought in 1967 only, after the recommendation of Integrated Council, right? So this was the origination of UAPA law, but when the UAPA law was brought into picture in 1967, till now we have seen several amendments in that. Till 2019, I think it's the 7th amendment in the UAPA law. But what was the basic three major changes which I can figure out in this the pre-19 Act of UAPA, coming from 7 to 19, and the amendment of 19 is first that previously the UAPA Act talked about the unlawful activities. Even it did not talk about terrorist activities. The first instance when UAPA Act came, it talked about unlawful activities. So actually, what first we should understand what is the unlawful activity there. Unlawful activities means if you are hampering the sovereignty, integrity of a country, but by what means? Not by any violent means, by words, by gestures, even by cartoons and all that. Then it comes under unlawful activities. Previously, in the initial phase of UAP Act, it did not even talk about the terrorist act. But later, after UAP Act, the TADA Act came. Then after 1984, Punjab riots, and then after Parliament Act, we have the quota and all that. And after repealing of these two acts, TADA and quota, what some basic features of TADA and quota were accommodated to the UAP Act of I mean, and after that, now it gave the law a draconian shape. Now, terrorist acts were also included in the UAP Act. Terrorist Act and UAP Unlawful Activities Act, these are not both, I mean, very much different from each other. The precautions are same, means we have to take precautions not to hamper the sovereignty and all that, but the modes are different. Unlawful act says that even if you, by utterance of your words, by making a cartoons, if you are hampering the sovereignty of a nation, it will come under unlawful act. If the same acts will be done by through weapons, through bombing and all that, it will be a terrorist act. So ultimately, UAP Act, which we are previously dealing only with the unlawful acts, now it also included terrorist acts. So this was the amendment. This was the flow of the amendment from 1967. And what happened previously was only the organizations were banned under UAPA. We have seen the CPI Maoists were banned, and only the organizations were banned under UAPA. But now what happened after this amendment? That even the individuals were added. I mean, individuals can be declared by the central government as terrorists through a notification. That created a problem. This is the shift from the pre-19 Act to the post-19 amendments. Again, the investigation agency, previously a officer of DYSP rank, was authorized enough to investigate into the matter. Now it was diluted and the power was given to the inspector rank, officers of NIA. They can also investigate. Previously, what happened is that if the under UAP Act, some investigation is going on in a state or seizure of property is going on in a state, the agency must take the permission of DGP of the state. So actually, this was the instance where the federalism was respected. Now, what happened after the amendment? There is no need of the permission of the DGP of a state to carry on the investigation and all that. Even the DG of NIA, which is a central agency, can permit the investigation in a particular state. Suppose in Bihar, suppose the agency wants to investigate into the matter under the UAPA. So it previously what used to happen, it had to take the permission of DGP of Bihar. So actually, the spirit of federalism was maintained at that time. So what was the acquisition of post-amendment UAPA, that it has diluted the spirit of federalism. Like the DG of NIA sitting at Delhi is permitting you to investigate any of the property situated at Bihar, no involvement of the state police. So that's also a matter of concern in the UAPA Act, and which is a flow of UAPA from 1967 to 2019. This can be seen.
That is a very good explanation of how the law actually evolved from the state's point of view, obviously. And now my question is related to that only, that sometimes people say that in UAPA, obviously the conviction rate is very low, very low. So sometimes they feel that jailing, the preventive detention is the actual punishment in UAPA most of the times. It's like people are languishing in jails for years and years, whether they are from Delhi or Punjab or any other state, they are languishing in jail for years and years. So my next question to you, sir, is that can you please explain us the concept in brief, the concept of bail, because obviously many common people, non-law background people are listening. So I want them to understand what is the difference in the concept of bail generally and the concept of bail in UAPA. And with that, I also want to ask the difference between, like the acts you said, Tada, Mokoka, Pota, and all these acts. So what is the difference between bail in UAPA and Tada Mokoka? Are they similar? Or whether something is more difficult or something is less difficult? So I want to ask that. So please give me a difference between normal bail provisions in criminal law and UAPA in specific.
Okay, so I will answer this question. First of all, we have to look at section 436, 437 and 438 of Criminal Procedure Code 1973, and which deals with the idea of bail. the concept of bail is related to the idea of liberty. Liberty, that is a fundamental right to liberty under Article 21 of Indian Constitution. So that liberty must be guaranteed. Fundamental right must be protected, and we are aware the principle that every person who is accused is considered to be innocent unless and until guilt is proved before the court of law. So, since there is a presumption of law that the accused is not a guilty person, so naturally the liberty and liberty is of course available for a prisoner as well. So, in some certain limited sense. So, liberty is one of the greatest blessing of humankind, and that's why it must be protected. It is a fundamental right. It is a human right. So, bail and a philosophy of bail is that right to liberty must be protected. And since the accused person is considered to be innocent unless and until guilt is proved, it means that the right to liberty must be protected anyhow. That is the whole constitutional idea behind the philosophy of bail. Now, what is the difference between the concept of bail in normal procedure and UAPA? The UAPA section 43D5 deals with the provision, and this particular law suggests that even if there is a police report or the case diary through which prima facie there is a case which has been made by or suggested by police officer, then the court will decline to give bail to the person. Now, this is a complete reversal to the idea of bail or philosophy of bail given by Criminal Procedure Code. Because in Criminal Procedure Code, there are certain conditions available that must be taken into consideration before giving a bail, like the accused must not tamper with the evidences, accused must not flee away with the justice. These are the major criteria. And if accused is of a person who has committed very serious crime, then naturally bail may not be given because justice may be hampered, isn't it? But as far as UAPA is concerned, it is completely a reversal of this idea, because there is a complete reversal in the name of a state of exception, a case, because you are creating a state of exception through a special law, and you are violating the right of liberty of a person, even if there is no established fact proved before the court of law the person is guilty.
Exactly.
Shikant sir?
Exactly. Even sir has told that bail is something which we treat in India as a right of a person, and this philosophy of bail which sir was telling, this philosophy of bail is very antiquity in nature. Like in England, when we see the concept of bail has started in the 16th and 17th century only. After that, after the 1835 Act, habeas corpus was act came in 1679 in United States. After that, Stack versus Ball case. It was a very landmark case, which was a US case, where it was told that if there is no risk of fleeing of the accused, then bail is his right. So if we have seen the global philosophy of bail, be it United States, be it United Kingdom, and all that, we see that in India also the regular process of bail under CRPC, which 436 and 439 says, it says for the general offences, but it also imparts the special legislation and a special procedure of bail. Like under Section 4, CRPC has a provision that if for a certain offences, if you can have a special process of bail, you can have it, and that's what UAPA is. What the actual difference, what the bail procedure under the general offences of IPC and the UAPA is, under the IPC, the general presumption of court till the accused is not proven guilty, so the presumption of innocence is there with the court. But what happens is in UAPA, if the prosecution has all the prima facie evidence which proves prima facie that he is guilty, then the burden is on the respondent, on the defendant, to prove that they can contradict the evidences. Otherwise, the prima facie presumption of court is he is guilty, contrary to what we consider in general offences. In general offences, the court considers that if there is no any proof, the first impression of an accused is he is innocent. You have to prove the guilt. But in reversal, under the UAPA Act, the presumption is he is guilty. You have to contradict his guilt through the evidences and all that. So this is the basic difference between the bail provisions in the general offences and all that. And even the Tada and Pota and Mokoka Act also, the process of bail was quite stringent. No bail provision We can say that there is no bail provision in Tata and Pota. That's what held by Supreme Court in Kartar Singh case also. It was so stringent, like virtually bail was not possible. However, we can say, but we have accommodated the provisions of Tata and Pota also in UAPA. What I have told, previously, that we have accommodated some of the provisions of Tata and Pota by including Terrorist Act. So we accommodated Tata and Pota in UAPA and now made the bail provisions stringent here also, where you have to counter that, please consider me innocent. However, in general offences, the court presumes your innocence, right? The prosecution has to prove that you are guilty. Here, prosecution has established prima facie opinion. Now you have to counter you are not guilty. This is the ultimate distinction between bail provision in UAPA and other laws, general offences.
So it seems like it also goes against the prohibition of, protection from preventive detention. This article also in the Constitution. I feel that sometimes UAPA is not about conviction; it's all about jailing someone and then
because convictions rate are also very less. If you will see the data of NCRB, the conviction rates are very less. Starting from, if you can take the data of 4 years of 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, I think only 27% conviction rate are there. Where are those gone? Who is still rotting in jails?
People in jails for 2 years, 3 years, they've already done the punishment for some smaller bailable offenses from IPC, I feel.
Exactly. We have different instances also for that.
And sir, now my question, just so that we can keep all the answers very brief, because we have so many questions. I have many questions to ask. So I personally believe, and I think this is the general norm, that in a functioning democracy, every person has a right to assert and advocate their independent opinions and views non-violently, no matter how unfavorable that they are to the majority or the people in power. So does UAPA clamp down on independent voices? And do you feel it is okay to put people behind bars just for their views, which is completely non-violent? And do you feel it is reasonable? And I want very brief answers, because I have the next question just in connection to this. So Nishikant sir, you can start.
Okay. In this particular UAP Act, because what we have witnessed is an extra prohibition on your right to speech and expressions. So what I felt under UAPA, before bringing the amendment, this particular act was sent to a select committee. What was also argued by Kapil Sibal in Rajya Sabha, that before this act is prone to challenge. And what's happened in Supreme Court, while this is a difference between Supreme Court has deferred this challenge, but what happened is this amendment act should have gone to the select committee also, because we have seen the UAP Act was brought by Congress government and the amendment was brought by BJP. This means everyone is in support of against terrorism, whether it's UPA government or NDA government. But what is the difference? The difference of implementation and amendments. If you are doing, you must be careful in that, because in first instance I have told you, the another set of persons is thinking that these laws must be misused against human rights activists, students, and all that. What we have seen here in the case of Asif, right, the Delhi High Court judgment. So because these amendments should have brought to the select committee, so they should have examined whether it's a violation of right to speech and expression or not. Because everything, even the Delhi High Court judgment commented on that you cannot drag the definition up to such extent that even the ordinary offenses fall under this act. And this will ultimately, this is the prohibition of your right to speech and expression. So interpretation must be done not in a strict sense and not in a extended sense. The government has extended the definition of unlawful activities, and this extension resulted into the accommodation of general offenses also here. So if the general offenses accommodated in this extended definition, this means if you speak towards any government also, it will be sedition. If you speak towards any system also, it will be sedition. So ultimately, it is a restriction of your right to speech and expression. What I feel regarding this particular act.
And Mrityunjay sir?
I feel there is a cultural issue, and law and culture has a deep connection, and we are aware that we have a colonial legacy, and our culture of law and legal system is very much colonial in nature. If you read Crisis of Indian Legal System written by Upendra Bakshi in 1960 and 70, a similar kind of problem was raised. There is a problem in legal culture in this country, And that's why whatever we are creating as a law, we are not considering that we are a republic, democratic republic nation state. We are not a colonial state governed by few elite people, and most of the people are just like a sheep. It is not the case. Every voice is important in a democracy. Like Rousseau suggested that there is a merge of general will and particular will, and your particular will and general will both has a kind of marriage so as to make a republican ideal possible. And that is not happening in our country, because simply because we have inherited that legacy of colonial mindset, which is still prevalent in our country in the process of legislation, adjudication, and implementation of law. This is what I think.
Okay, so sir, in this only, I just noticed one line that you said that whether it's the previous governments or the current governments, I am seeing in the legal perspective, you said that the intent of the state in general was to curb terrorism. That is what you said. But in my opinion, I mean, my question to you is that if the intent, whether the intent was to curb terrorism or whether the intent was to remain in power and curb the dissent in the name of terrorism, because what I feel is that we mostly using the word of any law, calling it unlawful activities prevention act or any law with a good fancy name, but the law is within the law, if we read it is draconian, then I feel that it is just like calling that we respect democracy, and that very day I am actually curbing someone's voice, so doing something in a fancy manner. So
Exactly.
don't, and I am being very critical of the state because state has some, every state, whether all nation states, we are in the time of nation states, all states I feel that has a tendency to oppress and be in power. Do you feel so, sir?
Actually, what I feel is we are not living in a state like Libya, where is a fake democracy, or in a communist country like China, right? So we have a rule of law, and this particular rule of law says that if you have a right to speech and expression, it cannot be curbed. Now, what you told is also restricted by Delhi High Court, that you have not to extend the definition of unlawful activities because it is already defined there. It is already defined what is unlawful activities and terrorist activities. Delhi High Court, the same thing Delhi High Court told. If you keep interpreting the definitions, if you keep playing with the words of the statute, ultimately, because you are in power, so you can drag. See, there are two. There, I mean, we cannot abruptly say that law is not good. We cannot abruptly say law is not bad because we have instances where the Indian government has urged with United Nations that please, I mean, suppose what happens when an individual does any terrorist activities without involvement in any organization. If the law says only the organization can be banned, suppose I am a person, I commit any terrorist activity, I'm not a part of any organization. So what is the solution with the government? He cannot ban me because I am an individual. The old law says you cannot declare an individual as a terrorist, but I am also not a part of an organization. So what's the recourse with the government in that sense? So in what happened in case of Lashkar-e-Toiba chief, the Indian government Indian government asked with the United Nations, declare him the terrorist. Because we cannot declare, we do not have any law. Our law does not say that we can declare a particular person as terrorist.
But do
And
we
he
have
kept changing the organization. He kept so these are the arguments which I am telling in favor of the law. So there are different instances, different opinions. So we cannot abruptly say that the law is draconian. If individual will be declared as a terrorist, it is draconian. This instance of it, what I am telling, suppose I am a terrorist and I don't belong to any group. What is the recourse of the government? If I do any terrorist act, he cannot declare me terrorist.
Yeah.
He cannot declare me terrorist.
So my same question is, let's assume that one individual, not conspiring with anyone else, in his own mind or her own mind, does a terrorist activity. Let's assume that. And maybe with that intention, government says that we bring this amendment wherein we declare individuals terrorists. So don't we have IPC provisions that we can at least keep them in jail, and declaring them terrorists can be some international in UN we can go and talk about it by declaration of them, because here also in UAPA in Asif's bail, Natasha and Devangna bail also, the Delhi High Court tries to say that how can someone be, what is the definition, because there is not particular definition of what is a terror. Terrorism can be also caste atrocity. If I terrorize you to drink water from my well, and if you dare touch the well, you will be killed. That is terrorism, because I'm terrorizing someone from dare coming there.
Exactly.
So that is what was my question, that
When you ask about IPC, when we see the definition of unlawful activities under UAPA, it is somewhat similar with the 124A of IPC, sedition. So there is also a notion which says that we do not need such kind of law because we are already having such law in IPC under 124A. Under 124A, we are already having the similar laws what unlawful activities say. But due to these instances where I gave you the instance of Lashkar-e-Toiba chief and all other activities where the Indian government was, felt helpless because he cannot declare any person as a terrorist. This amendment was brought. But what is the lacuna is this amendment also gives government a free hand to put any of the person as a terrorist. But we cannot also do without it. Because if we do without it, we have instances where we were helpless in declaring any person as terrorist. So what matters is how to handle with this law. The law is not bad. But there are some lacunas in the law also which should be amended, or while amending the law, that should be taken care of, which was not taken care by the government.
And Mrityunjay sir would like to add or give an alternative opinion to this?
Yes. I believe that particularly Section 15 of the Act deals with definition, and you can see the language of Section 15. Sovereignty, security of the state, all these things are there, are very vague, and there is no particular definition of terrorism. So the law is based upon terrorism, and terrorism is not defined. So can you expect the law will be used in proper way? If it is not defined, what is the direction of that law, where it is going to be applicable? So it will depend upon the government of the day to interpret the law as per their will, and they will implement and they will misuse it. This is what happening today. So Delhi High Court clearly suggested in the judgment that how can a person who is protesting against any law become a terrorist? What is the criteria? How will you say some person is a terrorist because some person has a different voice? Because ultimately, right to protest is a part of right of expression. And if you are using a law like this against those students and destroying their life, 1 year, 2 years life, you are destroying the life, right to liberty, is a very unfortunate thing. Because the problem is with the definition of law, definition of terrorism. That must be there.
Now we have understood what the legislature does to maintain the status quo. But now my question is also to judiciary, relating to judiciary. Some people think that we cannot criticize judiciary, but we don't know that judiciary is also subject to criticism. So now there are many laws which have come in last 3-4 years, whether you take the UAP amendment or CA or the farmers or any such big laws which have been constitutionally challenged, because we know that every law is subject to judicial review. So now UAP amendment was also constitutionally challenged. There are so many petitions lying in Supreme Court. Why do you feel it is right for Supreme Court to just defer those constitutional challenge? Because ultimately giving the blame to the government that no, you have not defined something in the law won't stand if the Supreme Court is not interpreting it finally, that what should be actually the law, or at least the interpretation of law, so that the misuse of law can be curbed. So do you feel that this delay by the Supreme Court by not listening to these challenges, this also added to the problem? Nishikant sir, you can say.
I think they might have their own logic, but I don't feel any logic in this for deferring such kind of laws. I mean, if such kind of laws are deferred, we have seen witnesses, a number of students, human rights activists rotting in jails. I mean, if such kind of law should not be ameliorated, I mean, the Supreme Court should have taken the quick action on that. I don't think any logic in that, but they might have some logic, and we cannot criticize on that way. Let them come with the logic why they are deferring such laws to be amended.
I
Mrityunjay
think
sir.
I think logic is subservient to justice.
Yes,
And when justice is injustices are being committed, gross injustices in fact, and people are asking for logic and justification and logic all are subservient to the very idea of justice, and that is unfortunately is not been followed in our country, because justice is more important than logic or justification.
exactly.
So, from this, I understood that when we, as students, also read constitutional law in college, so we normally say that there are three organs to the state: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Every organ is independent, working autonomously, but also keeps a check. Like judiciary keeps a check on the work of the legislature and the executive. If they extend their powers and misuse them and do not remain within the foundation of their constitutional duties, because they are also in constitutional positions. But for that, we have given the Supreme Court this power to keep a check that people in power and people and public remain within the foundation of constitution. So when the Supreme Court, and there have been many instances where the former Supreme Court judges have alleged that there is corruption, some kinds of corruption in judiciary also. Do you feel the constitution which is not being implemented, the reason for that is the constitution gives a little trust to the people in the constitutional positions, so that they can keep a check if that trust is broken. If I am a Supreme Court judge, if wherein I take the oath in the name of constitution, if that constitution puts a trust on me, if I break that trust with my own constitution, how will that constitution be on ground?
See, when you talk about the separation of powers, the philosophy was given by Montesquieu. But what we are witnessing for the last more than 50 years, like when you will compare the situation at the time of Indira Gandhi and all that, there was a tussle between the government and the judiciary. We have seen, like the Golaknath judgment, the Kesavananda Bharati judgment. When the government is strong, the Supreme Court is weak. When the Supreme Court is strong, the government is weak, Supreme Court is strong. That's what happened. That's what happened. And that was, I mean, Indira Gandhi once told by, when you will read the autobiography of Indira Gandhi, she told that I am a victim of judiciary, because she was after 17th Amendment Golaknath judgment came, bank nationalization came, and it was challenged in Supreme Court. R.C. Cooper case, where Supreme Court told no, you don't need to nationalize the banks, because in 1969 she was in power where Congress government was, was not with a big majority in the parliament, so the government was weak. So Supreme Court banned the bank nationalization. She tried to abolish the privy purse. Then there was a case of Scindia went to the Supreme Court, Madharo Scindia, and filed a case. The bank nationalization was not, was banned. That for that time. And after that, when Indira Gandhi came with the full majority in 1971 elections, then she did the 25th Amendment, 24th Amendment, and then clarified Golaknath judgment neutralizes that. Then 25th Amendment, then privy purse, then bank nationalization case, 25th Amendment, 26th Amendment, all those amendments in 1 year when she was in power. When she was not in the full majority in 1967, when she was the Prime Minister, then Supreme Court keep banning all those legislations, her 5-pointer program which she was running.
Like the amount
Court
of
is strong, government is weak, court is strong. This is the precedent we are seeing from the last 50 years.
Sometimes we
Unfortunately,
think
that is the most unfortunate situation.
that we should have, if there is a majoritarian government of very absolute power, then also Supreme Court should be standing there.
And what is my indication behind this is we have seen a majoritarian government right now, and that's why Supreme Court is deferring the law challenge.
And Mrityunjay sir, what is your view?
I feel judiciary is all about justice, and parliament is all about democracy, and both are not at conflict. Both must be harmoniously should work with each other. But if democracy is not functioning, or democracy is functioning without justice, then that democracy will be converted into a tyranny. And if justice is not followed, because judiciary is not properly doing their own duty, then ultimately democracy will suffer. So ultimately all the wings of the government must work in a harmonious way, so as to make this republic possible, an aspiration of the republic possible, which is not happening, unfortunately.
And that is what Dr. Ambedkar said, that we have a good constitution, but we don't have the constitutional morality as people.
Exactly.
So we have to develop, and I sometimes feel, which is very critical of me to say, that people in power or judiciary also sometimes sometimes I feel lack constitutional morality, wherein we have to stand with the trust which constitution has given us and move forward. Now, my next question is related to what Nishikant sir was saying, and it was also something I thought of, that after Indira Gandhi declared emergency on the reason of internal disturbance, which was later struck off and changed to armed rebellion, because she used the internal disturbance as the reason to put emergency to just curb the dissent she was facing, so that the people in this emergency, so that the people in power do not misuse it again to to gain absolute power. It was changed to external aggression, armed rebellion, armed rebellion, right? So do you feel now this is another new pattern, that do you feel that using dissent as a reason, earlier it was internal disturbance, the term was that, now using dissent as a reason to charge someone under UAPA is just another emergency which is undeclared one? Because we are here also using dissent, and the internal dissent the people in power are facing, they are using it under the garb of UAPA. It is just like emergency, and which is undeclared. What do you think, Nishikant sir?
It is not a surprise if we say that this situation will clearly, gradually lead us to emergency situation. Because what happens after the emergency in 1975, when a committee was set up, Tiwari committee, the findings of the committee said that during this emergency, I think about 2 years the emergency was there at that time. During this emergency, what was curtailed largely was the right to speech and expression. So following that pattern and the findings of the Tiwari committee report, which was constituted after the emergency, in the same pattern because when you came up with the UAPA Act, and the second notion, what we are saying, that the second set of people which we are thinking that such laws can be misused, and what we are seeing right now, in Delhi in the CA protest case, what we were referring at when Delhi High Court released the 3 students. So who are all they? They are not terrorists. So they are the students. Even I am a student law. So if tomorrow, if government comes with a legislation and I start protesting, so I will be jailed. Similarly, you can be jailed, everyone can be jailed. So ultimately, what is it? This is the undeclared emergency. And this is undeclared. But what I think, this can be an expressed emergency also by the government. No surprise in that. Because what ultimately the strongest point of emergency, weakest point of emergency is that curtailment of this right to speech and expression. What you are doing, you are not you are declaring a person a terrorist who is a student, because he is literate enough to counter you. He is literate enough to criticize you. He will be a terrorist. So on an educational basis, if you are considering them terrorists, now the whole India is getting educated day by day. So ultimately, this will lead, as per your theory, ultimately you can expressly declare emergency. Currently, we are in an implied emergency situation. But I'm not surprised if there is an expressly declared emergency. Only for the use of right to speech and expression, then the situation will impliedly set the precedence of emergency, what we were facing in 1975.
And Mrityunjay sir?
Imagine a situation if Mahatma Gandhi is here witnessing such kind of situation in our country, and what will be his reaction? How will he react to such law? Imagine a situation, and you have a complete answer. Because what was happening in the era of British, a similar kind of logic and justification is being given by the government, then naturally you can say that it is not functioning like a functioning democracy. It's true. And that's why most dangerous thing is it is not expressed. Emergency is not expressed. That is the most dangerous thing. At least in the express situation, you are aware that there is emergency. In unexpressed situation, you are a prisoner of your own ideas, and you are not aware that you are prisoned by the imagination of other people, and you are thinking that this is your voice, but in fact, whatever you are speaking is the voice of someone else, and that is most dangerous thing.
So then we can say that for the audience also, I just want to add one thing, that in Constitution, when we read emergency, there is some restrictions to even what people in power can do in emergency. That right to life and liberty are non-suspendable rights. They cannot be suspended even in the times of emergency. But here today, we don't have a declared emergency. We have undeclared emergency. So right to life and liberty has also been taken away. I feel that for if they declared emergency, they have to follow the rules of that. So if you don't have to follow any rule. It sometimes feels more dangerous. I
By
don't
not
know.
touching 352, you are imposing the emergency. By not touching 352.
Right. Sir, next question is regarding a judgment, which is the Vatali judgment, wherein the court held that bail under Section 43D5 of UAPA can be denied by relying upon prosecution documents, even when they are not admissible as evidence in court during the trial. Do you feel it must be scrutinized, and do you feel the recent Delhi High Court judgment, if it stands in the Supreme Court also further, do you feel it will overrule the Vatali judgment? And just to add, this Vatali judgment was the actual was also, I think, used in Miss Sudha Bhardwaj's case also, that when she was denied bail. So Mrityunjay sir, can you please explain us in
Yes,
more
yes.
detail?
Look at the provision of Section 43 D5. The provision is clearly saying that simply because the court is satisfied that relying upon the document of case diary and police report, court may decline the bail, isn't it? That is the law. Look at the judgment of Delhi High Court recently, and look at the judgment of Batali case, and compare the logic given by the Delhi High Court. One can easily say that this particular logic that to decline the bail is not justified, because simply because you are relying upon police, you are giving everything to the
Inadmissible
police,
evidence.
all weightage to the police, in spite of the fact that those evidences may be garbage in due course of time. But simply because I am demonstrating something to you and you are convinced, and you are declining the right to liberty of a person on the basis of those things which has no material basis at the time of trial. Nobody knows that. So in that sense, one can say that it must be scrutinized, and there should be a level playing field for both the parties, accused and prosecution, so that rule of law should be maintained.
Nishikant sir?
Exactly. The evidences and the if you rely on the evidence, the same I agree with Mrityunjay sir. Like if you rely on those evidences, this means you are relying on police, and we have several legislations. Even Evidence Act says that. I mean, confession given to a police officer not admissible. So all those evidences, which is admissible and not admissible, even the court told that even they are not admissible. I mean, what I think is that should be relied on, like because what happened in UAPA, under UAPA, like you have to counter to prove the innocence. What happened in this Vatali case, the Delhi High Court gave the bail to the Vatali, right, and Supreme Court rejected that. So I welcome this judgment, right? Why welcome this judgment? Because see, when we categorize these activities, there is the victimization of the human rights activist students also. But these laws are necessary. I mean, you cannot abruptly grant bail to anyone, because there was grave accusation on Vatali that he was funding terrorist activities, right? So in that sense, providing abruptly bail to a particular terrorist, I mean, I can term him as a terrorist, like and not granting bail on relying the evidences given by the police and all that, both are, I think, irony on the judiciary. Because if you are non-granting bail to anyone, why? Because the police has submitted such kind of evidences. That's also not be regarded under judiciary and under the rule of law. And if you are granting bail only sticking to the procedure laid down, then I think this is also not be regarded in a such kind of democratic country like India, right? So I very much welcome the decision of Supreme Court in Vatali judgment that he has denied the bail of Vatali.
But Miss Sudha Bhardwaj was denied on the basis.
That was the another case where the whole country knows, and the contribution Sudha. See, I think she is the human rights activist.
I'm saying what are the contributions. Some I am because I think the law is.
Why I am referring these contributions, because this was the intention of, because for committing a terrorist activity you must have terrorist intentions. But because your activities turns into a terrorist consequence, you cannot be termed as a person with a terrorist intention, right? So she has done a number of.
My question is, law is termed to be blind. So how can I, without any prosecution of any person, I mean, see that person and think that he seems like terrorist, and she or he doesn't seem like terrorist.
No, but
And because law should be blind, na? I should be blind for you also, and Mrityunjay sir also.
law is blind, but law also gives some discretion to court. Discretion is
Because
not, I mean,
otherwise,
discretionary
you are
powers
saying
cannot
that
be
if
termed as
I'm very
arbitrary
educated,
powers.
you are saying if I'm very educated and in future I give so many contribution to fund one of the field like legal field.
My
Why are you
pointing of
saying that I cannot do something? Or the other way, that if I am not done any contribution, if I'm from a very weak background also, why are you saying that I must have done something?
no, my pointing of contribution shows the intention of the person. So whatever activity which is termed as a terrorist activity, that is only to aware the person. The government thinks it's a terrorist activity. So my contention is to judge the intention of a person, intention of the person, and law gives discretion to the courts also. Where there is a term in the statute, it says the court may grant. This means discretion given to the court. So court must use that discretion in a welfare manner, I think. Welfare manner, because see, when I say discretionary power, it does not mean arbitrary power. Discretion can be given. I regard giving the discretion of the courts. So the court can use this morality and all these contributions and all these things under the head of the discretionary power awarded to the court. The constitution gives the discretionary power to the court. So we should consider, the court should consider this not beyond law, but under this boundary of discretionary power awarded to the court by the law.
Because anyway,
So that
all
gives a gap.
the
That gives a room to the court to think the contribution of a person, to intention of a person, right? Because the government says the law with the hands of the government. They can declare any person as a terrorist by giving a notification, right? So these things, if the court has power, if the court has discretion enough to consider these things, these things should be considered. What a person we are doing. If the definition says it's a terrorist activity, but the intention says that this activity was only to aware the person about their human rights, then it should not be strictly interpreted through the words of the legislation. It
Right.
should be, yeah, it should be mixed with, it should be treated with the discretion of judiciary, with the prudence of the judges, right?
So I have just last point, and after this I will be taking some questions which the audience has given us. So Mr. Gurkaran has also filtered them, but before that, Mrityunjay sir, you can add up to this point कि कानून अंधा होता है तो सबके लिए अंधा होना चाहिए, उसको दिखना नहीं चाहिए. और समझ लीजिए कि आज चलिए बेल डिनाई होए ना होए, because the bail provision is very discretionary. It is the bail provision is based on the discretion of the court only in non-bailable offences anyway. But arbitrariness is antithesis of equality. So if you are arbitrary in one case and not and discretionary in another, that leads to inequality, which I felt somewhere that I understand every case is different in the basis, but the principles to deal the cases should be similar. So Mrityunjay sir, what do you say that law should be blind? Because people think, what a layman thinks law should be blind is कानून अंधा है उसको उसको दिखता ही नहीं क्राइम. बट द एक्चुअल इंटरप्रिटेशन शुड बी कानून अंधा है इसलिए उसको हर इंसान एक जैसा लगता है जो सामने आता है कटघरे में खड़ा होता है. So what do you want to say, Mrityunjay sir?
Yes, yes. Law is neutral and law must be neutral. But the people who are operating law is not neutral. They are made of thought, conditioning, hunches. They are full of prejudices. And that's why realist school of jurisprudence suggests that the judges, and they have their own way of thinking. So if judges think that somebody is a terrorist, and simply because who is a terrorist, there is no clear definition in the law. So how will you distinguish that this person is a terrorist or that person is a terrorist? Do we have any look? Do we have any picture of terrorism? No, we don't have. Do we have any definition? Yes, we have. What kind of definition? Very vague definition. It may be operated anywhere. And that's why whenever judges has to operate the law, they are going to operate as per their own thought, their own thinking, their own conditioning. And if their conditioning is based upon certain prejudices, then they will interpret the law as per that prejudices. In that sense, even though law is a blind, law is a neutral, but ultimately the people who are operating the law, they can manipulate the law as per their own understanding.
And now my question is, to you, both of you, and one by one, the people have addressed the questions specifically to both of you. One of the questions is Article 13, as we say that if something is in violation of fundamental rights, it should be struck off. But so in similar sense, one of the person, I'm sorry, I don't know the name who asked this question. One of the person asked that if some of the provisions of UAPA, appear to be violating fundamental rights like liberty, free speech, etc., how are such provisions allowed to exist? And who will tell the government that such and such provision is bad? Maybe he's asking for the judicial review. So, Nishikant sir, you can start.
No one will allow such provisions, but you cannot hold a home minister presenting a bill regarding this. Let him present a bill, let him come up with a law. We have Supreme Court, and that's what happened in this case. However, it is very unfortunate that Supreme Court has referred this case. But there is a course of action. Let the government come up with the law. You cannot bar the government that you cannot come with the law. The home minister will present the bill. The home minister has presented the amendments. You will not bar him presenting the amendments. Like, let the law come, and after that you have a recourse to go to the Supreme Court, which has already, some people have approached the Supreme Court. However, what should be a midway in that, I have already told previously, that after the presentment of the bill or before the presentment of the bill, it should be gone to a select committee. Experts should have sat with the bill and should have discussed whether this bill, because ultimately this is a waste of time. You will clear the amendment, you will come up with the amendment, and that will be challenged in Supreme Court. So ultimately that is a waste of time. I am not saying that it cannot be challenged. It will be challenged. It has been challenged. But what used to happen before coming up with the amendment, if you have taken care of, you have put the proposed bill with a select committee, then there was no need to go to the Supreme Court in that. So, but you cannot bar the government presenting the bill, and the government cannot bar you taking the bill, amendment to the Supreme Court. So that's the midway in that.
And Mrityunjay sir, कि अगर कोई violate कर रहा हो fundamental rights, तो who will tell the government what should be kept and what should be not as provisions? Which provision?
So first of all, we have to distinguish between parliament and government. Law is made by parliament, not government. And that's why we feel that whatever government is doing, government is doing everything. Why government is doing everything? Because our parliament is dominated by government, and most of the members belong to that party. And in that sense, do we have parliamentary democracy? If we have parliamentary democracy, then there is a voice of government only in parliament, and a private bill may not be passed as a law. And that's why there is a problem, because once a government is passing the law as per their own will, and they are creating their own law, that law is not being enacted as per taking into consideration the constitutional norms. And that's why whenever you find out that fundamental right is not taken into consideration while keeping certain provision in the law, why they don't take consideration? Because naturally the nature of government is all about power. They want to preserve power, and fundamental right is always the antithesis of power. Because when you look at the jurisprudence of right and the power, you can find out that both are antithesis to each other. That is the big problem.
Make the power accountable.
Yes. So parliament is the voice of people, and that is dominated by power. So all the norms reflect regarding power instead of right, because the right norm will be reflected only when parliament has an independent voice separated from government.
And now my next question is, this question is about what is your opinion on the point if I am saying that UAPA is going against the Article 14? Because like people like Mazrat Zahra, who is a photojournalist in Kashmir, she is a journalist, and in Indian government declared charged her under UAPA. Because the government claims that her photos were anti-India, although she was just covering as a photojournalist. So what is your opinion? And I think one more journalist, Gohar Gilani, was also charged under UAPA in Kashmir. So what is your opinion, Mrityunjay sir, in this?
The point, what is your question, Swati?
The person is asking that sometimes UAPA goes against Article 14, that is right to equality and equal protection of law. So some
Yes, yes.
photojournalists and journalists in Kashmir like Mazrat Zehra, her photos, just the photos she clicked, on that basis she has been charged under UAPA. And even one more journalist, Gauhar Gilani, has been charged under UAPA. What is your opinion on that? Does it violate 14? And if it violate Article 14, why is UAPA here?
Yes, yes. Again, right to equality is definitely violated in such cases, because there is a clear-cut prejudice against those accused, because ultimately you don't have sufficient reason to charge those people under UAPA, because the purpose of UAPA is all about prevention of unlawful activities or terrorist activities. But those activities does not amount to terrorist activity, because ultimately terrorism means there is some amount of violence, and that violence must be related to the psychological impact upon the people's mind. If somebody is doing the work of journalism, how this work is related to idea or to the very act of violence, or to the very act of terrorizing people? So definitely there is a violation of Article 14, or the selective use of law against some people to muzzle the voices, or to prosecute some people simply because of they are doing some great work in the field of journalism.
Now, one last question on this, that uh, this is to both of you, because this actually tells the the general opinion of both of you on this law. Why UAPA cases fall flat in courts? Basically, why the conviction rate is so low when the government, whether it's the present government or the previous government, keeps saying that it is anti-terror. Why the conviction is so low on in UAPA? Why they fall flat? Rishi Kansar.
The conviction depends on the trial. So if you put a particular person in jail and does not allow the trial to go on, how the conviction will happen? So the problem with this law is the persons are rotting in jail without any trial going on for him. So if the trial will not go, conviction will not. So intention of the government is to put a particular person in jail, let them rot in the jail, because they
But
also know.
he's asking specifically the conviction rate. Conviction rate is on the
Because
basis
the
when
intention of the intention of the government, no, that's what that's why the law is condemned. Because
Hmm.
ultimately you will come to know, ultimately a person who is a student, he will always be a student, not a terrorist. So ultimately he will not be convicted. So first of all, because the government is catching the wrong person, so obviously the conviction rate will be less. You are catching the human rights activists, you are catching the students, you are catching the social activists. So how they will be convicted? So ultimately, because we have all faith in judiciary, so ultimately judiciary finds that they are not terrorists, so they should not be booked under UAPA. So ultimately they will be released. But what is the problem? They are kept in jail for years and years, one and a
Justice.
half year, even 9 years in the case of Makoka in Ashif, when he was arrested in Maharashtra. The Bombay
Recently,
High
one
Court judge.
recently one man got out of jail. I think after 11 years, he was a Kashmiri and
9.5 years, I think, yeah, in Maharashtra
UAP.
also. So the government knows that they are not terrorists, but you put him in jail. Now what happened? Ultimately, the judiciary will come to the truth, and the judiciary is pronounced that yes, he is not a terrorist. Release him on bail. He was released. Ultimately, he will not be convicted. But what he lost is the time. So ultimately,
Justice,
the low conviction
injustice
rate shows
happened.
that the persons you are declaring as terrorists, ultimately they are not terrorists. If they would have been terrorists, they would have been prosecuted, they would have been convicted. But as the conviction rate is very less, this means the persons which you are putting in jail on the name of being terrorists, they are not terrorists. So this
And
shows
with
that
it,
they are not terrorists. But
and
then
with
you delay the trial.
yes. And Mrityunjay sir, I'm sorry we are lacking time now, so
No,
I'm
not an issue. Yeah, sir.
and Mrityunjay sir.
Yes, I believe the conviction rate is low, because definitely what Nisrikant sir is saying is correct. There is not a proper application of law. Law is misused. In the name of UAPA, people are arrested, and though those people are not directly connected to terrorist activity, those people are simply expressing their voices. Even if they are expressing their voices, government is using this law, misusing the law, in fact, to arrest those people. So naturally, before the court of law, the evidences are not there. So naturally, there will not be conviction. So conviction rate will be definitely low.
So the
That very
misuse is the norm and use is the exception, I feel,
yes, yes,
in UAPA. So
yes.
here we come to the end of this discussion. Thank you very much, Mrityunjay sir and Nishikant sir. Thank you very much for a fruitful and also a very peaceful discussion, because most of the discussions today, go to some extreme end and they don't end up well. Thank you for keeping the decorum, and thank you for giving us so much such insights to the discussion. I just wanted to ask Gurkaran if he wants to add something, or we have to end this discussion.
So yeah, the session would be ended. Now I would request Ms. Tanya to give a vote of thanks.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. So we have reached the end of this insightful discussion. I, Tanya Malhotra, would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the entire team of Legally Yours to extend my heartiest thanks to both our panelists, Mr. Nishikant and Mr. Mrityunjay sir, for taking out time from their busy schedules and enlightening us with their knowledge. Thank you so much for enlightening us with your valuable knowledge today. Today's discussion was full of interesting things. It gave us deep insight into topics not just of the existing scenarios, but how the law has evolved over the years. I'm pretty sure that the knowledge we gained today will definitely help us throughout. Thank you so much. Wholeheartedly,
And
I would also like to thank Advocate Swati Khanna for taking out time and moderating today's session. I would also like to thank my fellow teammates for working hard to put together this event. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for their presence. Also, don't forget to visit our website, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, and join our Telegram group to know all about our updates. Also, please let us know how we can help make your experience with Legally Yours better. Good evening and have a great evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tanya.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gurkaran. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nishikant sir. Thank you.